Now I shall segue to another woman. I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. And our speaker is Nicole Steward, and she has a master's in social work. And her topic is self-care for caregivers. Nicole believes that being a caregiver has its rewards and challenges, as all of you know. For many of us, as we care for others, we carry much of their struggle within us, which can cause burnout. Tonight, Nicole will share information. She'll share information on how we carry the needs of others in our bodies, along with some practical self-care tools to help us thrive as we care for them. Nicole wears many hats and has much experience. She's a social worker with an MSW, as I said. She is a homeless foster youth liaison. She is a certified yoga instructor. Her focus is on community engagement, public education, and trauma-informed yoga. She has 2 decades of social work practice in nonprofits and accountability work in K-12 education. Nicole teaches yoga, mindfulness, and offers trauma-informed self-care workshops and retreats. She's also a very good friend of my daughter's. So I know Nicole personally. So let's welcome her.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right. And it's funny, one of the things you mentioned was that I'm a homeless foster youth advocate. I'm not homeless. I'm a homeless advocate and a foster youth advocate. Just want to clarify that. Is it okay volume-wise? Okay. Not that there's any shame in being homeless, right? The way that was read, I was like, oh, wait. So good evening, everybody. How are you? Good. Good. I teach in schools a lot, and usually when I ask that question, I get, So you were starting off on a good note. So like she said, I'm Nicole Steward. I'm a social worker, a family advocate, homeless youth advocate, foster youth advocate. I'm also a foster parent and a foster grandparent. That's my little plug for fostering teenagers, because then they come into their 20s and they have kids for you. The magic. You can circumvent having your own kids and just become a grandparent. I'm also the spouse to someone who is living with mental illness. So I have been a caregiver in different capacities most of my life, both as a young child, but also as an adult and now in a married relationship. So I want to honor the different ways that we come to this caretaking role, whether we were born into it, whether we married into it, whether we grew into it, or maybe we birthed it. And today, one of the things I want to talk about is how we take care of ourselves when we're taking care of other people. This is a big passion of mine because as a social worker, I've seen burnout. Not just like, oh, okay, I'm tired, I want to do something else, but like catastrophic burnout. Like, this job is killing me. And I've recognized that I've been burnt out by my own caregiving. Partly because when we're caregiving for folks who are dealing with mental illness, we can get a really high highs and really low lows. And oftentimes the person that we love very dearly, it's hard to watch them suffer. And sometimes that suffering or the challenges that they have may be aimed at us, even though we're the ones caretaking. So our role can be very complex and complicated, and that's why we have to take care of ourselves if we want to continue to do this. So I'm a big self-care advocate. You will figure that out very quickly. But I wanted to come today to talk a little bit about what goes on with us as caregivers, kind of how we hold our stress, what other impacts that has for us, and then I promise I'm not going to leave you on a low note. We'll talk about what we can do about it. And hopefully a little bit of levity. We're allowed to laugh, right? So, again, very briefly, I've given you my introduction, but I also want to recognize that this topic may not always be fun to talk about. And usually when I talk about self-care for caregivers, I jokingly say we have to lock the doors so everybody has to stay where they are. Because it's easy to talk about other people, but when we talk about taking care of ourselves, everyone's like, oh yeah, I got something to do, right? So I'm glad that you all are here. I was hoping there'd be more people, but I also am really happy there are this many people, because usually when we talk about self-care, there's like 2 people in the room. So I feel like a superstar tonight. But I also want us to get grounded before we have this conversation. So if you can just sit up really nice and tall in your chair, both feet flat on the floor. And if you can't put the back in the floor, or back in the seat and feet on the floor is more important. Got some long legs in here. Good. And just take a moment to notice where you are, right? To come into this space. And to maybe set an intention for this presentation, thinking about something that you'd like to get out of it. And as we talk about this conversation, or we have this conversation, if anything comes up for you or if anything's triggered, just pay attention to where that comes up in your body and give yourself some self-care, some compassion, some love. And I'm also, like I said, I'm a big advocate of self-care. So if during my talk you need to get up and stand, or you need to go out to the restroom, or you need to just get out of the room, I won't take it personally. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself while we have this conversation. And we're going to just jump right in. So we have to talk about caregiver stress syndrome. Ultimately, I call this the cost of caring, right? Recognizing that when we are giving to other people, there's a cost to us. That's natural. Sometimes, though, that can show up as exhaustion. It can show up as anger. It can show up as grief, depending on where we are in our journey with our loved one. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not aware of the stress that we're carrying, it can also continuously have a stress response in our body that can lead to chronic illness. I like to nerd out a little bit on the neurobiology of stress, but recognizing that when we're stressed out, when there's stress perceived in our brain, right? Our brains are wired for threats or rewards. And reward keeps us going back. A threat pulls us away, right? Once we experience something that is a threat, we pull away, we try to avoid that thing. Whether the threat is broccoli or the threat is a negative situation. And when we do that, when we find ourselves in a threat situation, real or perceived, physical or emotional, yeah, our brains release two chemicals, adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline and cortisol are the chemicals that are the stress response, right? And in the moment of a stressful situation, adrenaline and cortisol help us stay alert. They help us do the thing we need to do. We focus our attention where the threat is, and we try to mitigate it and remove it from our lives, right? And then that adrenaline and cortisol gets dissolved in our body, and we can go about our day. But when we're continuously stressed out, when we're continuously overwhelmed, when we're continuously giving, and that stress response is activated repeatedly or over a long period of time without any relief, adrenaline is the chemical in our body that helps us to go. Cortisol is actually released at the same time as adrenaline because it acts as a pain reliever. So that in the moment that we are dealing with a threat and we have to take action, cortisol acts as a pain reliever so that we don't necessarily feel the pain that we're dealing with in that moment until we get to a place of rest, and then we might notice it. Right? Cortisol is that chemical that helps parents lift cars off their kids. Right? It's the chemical that allows us to be physically hurt and still go and not really even notice that we've been hurt. So in our caregiving stress, that stress response is still activated. The other thing about cortisol is cortisol initiates inflammation in the body. So too much cortisol in the body, right? Then we have inflammation in the body. And some of you might know that inflammation is the base cause of a lot of our chronic illnesses. Right? And it can also exacerbate mental illness. So the goal of self-care is to try to remove that stress response from our body as quickly as possible, right? It's a normal response, and that's okay, but we don't want that adrenaline and cortisol hanging out. We don't want to soak in it. To allow us to shift into what we call a rest and digest situation. The biggest thing about stress, especially caregiver stress, is that we have to notice when we're experiencing it. And for some of us, we've been doing this work for so long, we've been taking care of others for so long, that that's just part of our lives. That may just be how we are now, right? How we show up. Like exhaustion is just like my baseline now, right? Instead of like, sometimes I'm exhausted. Like, no, I am exhaustion, yeah? But recognizing the signs and symptoms of our stress is very important. Recognizing that when we are feeling depressed, when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling a little irritable, that might be a sign of stress. A simple sign may also be losing our balance, getting a little clumsy, or losing little things, right? Where's my cell phone? Oh, it's in my hand. Where are my keys? Oh, they're in the fridge, right? Recognizing when we're kind of losing it a little bit, or we feel clumsy, we run into things, we trip over things. right? That might be a sign, the first sign of stress in our brains. We can feel tired and run down, and also then have difficulty sleeping, and isn't that fun, right? When you're exhausted, but you also have insomnia. Lovely. Sometimes we may overreact to minor issues. We may find new health issues, and that's something I'm noticing as I'm aging. I turned 40 this year, and like every morning I'm like, oh, what's that? Oh yeah, that does that now, right? And then having trouble concentrating or focusing, having trouble going about our daily lives or our routines, those can be signs of caregiver stress. Then we have what we call compassion fatigue. And often compassion fatigue is a term that's used to express how caregivers, right, those of us who are compassionate, because you have to be compassionate to be a caregiver for someone else, because you could say, yeah, I'm good, take care of yourself, right? But recognizing that it shows up when we consistently give care to others without taking any time off, without getting any respite, and again, without being able to calm that stress response in our body. We may not even know that we have that going on in our body until we get some relief. And then we notice like, oh, that hum that I normally have in my body, that buzzing that I usually have in my body is gone. What was that? Some of the signs of and symptoms of compassion fatigue are very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't even like the term disorder, right? It's post-traumatic stress. That's a normal response. When we have a traumatic experience, post-traumatic stress is a normal response, right? There's no disorder about that. But we may have nightmares. We may have intrusive thoughts. Sometimes those intrusive thoughts and nightmares might be about the demise of our loved one, right? Or about other people treating them unkind. We may have emotional numbing, where we don't want to feel so crappy. So we try to find ways to make ourselves feel better. And sometimes those ways of making ourselves feel better are sold to us as self-care, right? Treat yourself. Retail therapy. It feels awesome to buy something, as long as you're not maxing out your credit cards, right? Going into debt to do retail therapy doesn't help. Sometimes we want to numb out with drugs or alcohol, right? I'm a big fan of a dirty martini on a Friday night happy hour, but if that dirty martini is every night, right? I used to work for an organization that Friday nights we did happy hour because we deserved it. We worked hard. Then after a while, we were doing Thursday and Friday night happy hours because we worked hard. We deserved it. Then we were doing Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night happy hour because we worked hard and we deserved it. But never Monday and Tuesday because only heathens drink on Monday and Tuesday, right? We were better than that. But I watch some people who I love dearly and who are wonderful at their work fall into addiction, right? Because the numbing works in the moment, but if we continuously do that, and yeah, it'll work long term, but then it creates new problems, right? Sometimes our emotional numbing, we pull into different kinds of addictions. Maybe it's sex, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's television or screens, right? These lovely things. But recognizing the trick about emotional numbing is that when we try to numb out negative emotions, and I say that in air quotes because emotions just are, they're just energy. They're not good or bad. It's what we do with the energy that they give us, right? But when we want to numb out, like I don't feel good, I want to numb this out, the challenge is you can't selectively numb out. So when you're numbing out the bad feelings, you're numbing everything out, right? You're numbing out the good feelings. So it's harder to feel joy. It's harder to feel happiness. It's harder to feel lighthearted when you're numbing out anxiety, depression, frustration. Yeah? So we have to be very careful about that. We can have an exaggerated startle response, and this can be something that, again, we might not even notice. We're carrying so much stress, right? We're worried about our loved one. We're carrying the stress, and then maybe someone taps us on the shoulder and we jump, and we don't even notice it, right? And someone else has to tell us, like, ooh, okay, I was just saying hello. What was that response about? We may have decreased feelings of safety. We may not feel safe in our communities. We may not feel safe in our homes. We may not feel safe in our bedrooms, right? There have been moments for me as a caretaker where I've had to lock my bedroom door at night. I don't like that feeling. But I had to do it for safety, for myself and for my loved one. We can have an increased cynicism, and sometimes I will say cynicism can cause either detrimental behavior to the people that we're caretaking for, or we can use it as a kind of comic relief, right? And I think that those of us who are caregivers tend to have a really wicked sense of humor. right? We can kind of turn it on, and we can be really sharp and biting in our humor. And I love that about us. And also we have to be careful that we don't fall into that cynicism that tells us, well, nothing matters. Why am I even doing this? Right? There's never going to be a treatment. This is never going to work. My husband's never going to get better. My son's never going to be better. Right? We have to be really careful about that. And sometimes that fatigue can also pull us away from the people we love and away from the communities that we love. So that's why I'm thrilled that NAMI exists and that you all are here. Because it's really hard to show up in community with other people when you really want to just hide in your house. But I'll speak for myself. And these are some statistics that many of you may know. But depression is very real for those of us who are caregivers. And many of us don't get a break or take a break. Right? Maybe the person that we're caring with lives with us, most likely. Right? So there's never a like, okay, you go to your house and I'll go to my house. Yeah. And then just some, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm really in the way being right here, especially with my little poof, but just a little bit of information about caregiver depression. And I will provide the slides to Kathy so you guys can all have them, so you don't have to read everything. You're welcome to take pictures as well. This is all free information. But recognizing that lack of sleep can contribute also to our feelings of depression. And lack of sleep is very real in this caregiver role. Even if you are sleeping, you might not be getting restful sleep, right? How many of you get 8 or more hours of sleep a night? Good, a few of you. Awesome. High five.
How much is good?
Right? 8 or more. 8 or more is recommended, right? But for many of us, that may not be an option. Maybe it's because we can't fall asleep, or maybe when we get to sleep, we have intrusive thoughts or nightmares, or maybe it's because our loved one has trouble at night, and that's the time when we're up, and then we have to go to work all day, right? Or in the moment of a manic episode or a 5150 or something like that, maybe we're not sleeping for a whole week because we're just anxious and we're trying to deal with what our loved one needs, right? That was my experience 2 summers ago. Recognizing that if we are a veteran or a military service person, or the loved one that we're caring for has experience in the military, that can be a very different challenge. Are there any military folks in the room? Okay.
Oh, veteran.
Veteran, thank you for your service. Thank you as well. And you as well. Thank you. But recognizing that adds maybe a different layer, right? I'm the daughter of 2 veterans, 3 veterans technically. My stepfather is as well, right? And there's a different level of trauma for some veterans that they're dealing with. If you're a caregiver and you're the veteran, you might be triggered by some of the things that your loved one does or says. So being aware of that. And then recognizing that depression impacts us differently based on gender. Women, for the most part, are caregivers. That's a statistic, right? Not all the time. But for men, it may be harder to seek treatment for depression. Yeah? And I put this in, obviously, to give a little levity, but also to remind us that it's important to see our doctors regularly, right, whether we want to or not, to get the mammograms, to get the colonoscopies. Yeah, I'm the one to remind you about that. Sorry. That's like basic self-care, right? The dentist every 6 months, yeah? Okay. But when I saw this, like, this is my dad, right? I had to push my dad to the doctor. Come on. My threat was, if you don't want me to give you a colonoscopy, you need to go to the doctor to get one. That worked. Had the gloves and everything. No. But recognizing that when we are dealing with stress or depression or fatigue, that can then lead to the burnout. Yeah? Burnout can be a slow flow, or it can be really quick. It can be a one-time incident where we're very overwhelmed for like a period of 2 or 3 weeks and we burn out. Or it can be a series of years that we are dealing with our loved one, we're dealing with our own stress, and then we kind of feel the burnout later. But it's a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. And when I say exhaustion, I don't mean tired, right? I mean like my bones are tired. Like all the women in me are tired, right? Like I woke up, I went and brushed my teeth, and now I want to go back to bed. That's the exhaustion I'm talking about. It's not alleviated with sleep. It's not alleviated with, I don't know, a spa day, right? And the challenge with burnout is that it can shift our view, our perspective on the world in general, right? It can make us very cynical about the world. And it can shift our view about our loved one, the one that we're caring for, right? When we're burnt out, like that's that last nerve, right? Like just say something. And our loved one still has the needs that they have, right? They may not be able to control that. But if we're experiencing burnout, our ability to meet their needs is going to be much less. We can withdraw from our friends, family, and loved ones. We lose interest in the things that actually brought us joy, and that is really hard, right? We know what those little things we can do, the little 30-minute thing I can do for myself, or the little trip I can take to Starbucks to get myself my coffee, or the hour I can spend at the bookstore, not buying any books because I have a bunch on my shelf that I haven't read yet. But recognizing that when those things used to bring us joy, we used to be excited to do those things, and they're not anymore. That's a sign that burnout's on, kind of knocking at the door. We might get changes in our appetite, changes in sleep pattern, getting sick more often, irritability, right? That one comes in. And then this last one, I think we have to be very honest with ourselves, right? When we are burnt out, we may have feelings of wanting to hurt ourselves or the loved one that we're caring for. And this is a conversation, we don't have often out loud, but I will be vulnerable and honest and say that when I had to take care of my loved one during a psychotic break, there was a moment of his constant suicidality that I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it just be easier if he did it already? Ugh. Right? That's not a good feeling. And it didn't make me feel good about myself in the moment. And of course, that's not what I want. I love this person. I don't want them out of my life. But I was so exhausted and so burnt out that was the thought that came to my mind. Yeah? So we just have to be honest about that. So what are some of the practical self-care things that we can do for ourselves so that we can take care of ourselves while we're taking care of others? This says, a positive attitude may not solve all your problems, but it will annoy enough people to make it worth the effort. Right? It works every time. Now, I'm sharing this because when I talk about self-care, and Bev read my little bio, I'm a yoga instructor, I'm a mindfulness coach, right? I'm in the woo-woo world. But I'm very science-based, I'm very grounded. So when I hear a new woo-woo concept, I say, okay, tell me the science of it. Make it real for me. And sometimes, one of the things I will say, I was Googling, self-care for caregivers. How to take care of yourself when you're a caregiver. And some of the first things I saw one, it was like an article that said 2 things you have to do if you're a caretaker and you want to take care of yourself. And the first was change your attitude. And I wanted to throw my laptop across the room. I was like, oh yeah, here, change your attitude, right? And I jokingly say that because I do recognize, right, there is science behind the fact that our thoughts can trigger our emotions, right? Think about the last time you were worried about something, right? Whether it was an event that you had to go to or a person that you had to talk to, you were worried about it, you spent all this time and energy worrying about it, thinking about the worst case scenario, right? And then it happened and it wasn't really that bad, right? How many of you have had that experience, right? But you spent all that time and energy worrying about that thing, right? So what you've done is your thoughts about that thing have created a feeling in your body, that stress response in your body, that anxiety in your body. So we know that our thoughts can change our feelings. Now we can do the opposite, right? When we're not feeling good, we can think positive thoughts to shift ourselves out of that feeling. But that takes a lot more time, effort, and practice, right? And I'm not here to tell you, just think happy thoughts and everything will be great. Yeah, because I don't want you all to I can see the arrows, right? So I have that there just as a little reminder. Yes, happy thoughts are wonderful, but there's a little more to it, right? And I want to share this because often when I talk individually to people and they ask me, like, what can I do better? How can I make a better self-care practice? How do I take care of myself? I often want to find out what are the barriers, right? And sometimes it's, I don't have enough time, I don't have money, I don't like getting my nails done, which is fine. Self-care is not nails done, right? Can be if that's your thing. But the one barrier that I find over and over and over again is caregivers often do not think that they are worthy of the care that they give to other people. Whether you are aware of that or not, right? Whether that's a thought in your head or just a vibe in your body, that's the reality. For many of us, we've been caregivers since we were very young. Maybe we were taking care of parents who were dealing with a mental illness. Maybe we were taking care of siblings, right? Maybe we were just that kid in school that was empathic and could understand what other kids were going through, and we were caretaking in our schools. Right? And now we're grown, or we like to think we're grown, chronologically, and we're still doing the same things. Maybe with a different person, maybe in a different context or different relationship. But if we've been caretaking since we were little, and that was the way that we were accepted in our families, or shown love from other people, we have to really examine that and recognize that our caregiving now, we have to remember that we are worthy of the care that we give to other people. So if you learn nothing else from this presentation, please take this away from it. And I do mean you. So, some really, really basic self-care. And yes, I am that person that's going to tell you that you need to get 8 or more hours of sleep. They don't all have to be consecutive. You kind of want them to get some consecutive so you can get that really deep REM sleep, right? The actual sleep that's going to relieve you and give you some energy in the next day. But when we sleep, our brains are recalibrating, right? Our cells are regenerating, our neurons are reconnecting. We're able to digest and metabolize everything that's happened in our day. And if we don't get that sleep, that's not happening. So all that is staying with us. Right? We're never able to release that stress response. Our brain can't regenerate. Our cells aren't regenerating. Right? And it's a slow death. And you can't catch up on sleep. Right? It's not one of those things where all week you can do like run on 4 hours of sleep a night and then on the weekends sleep all day. Our brains don't work like that. Yeah? And my favorite is when I hear people say, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Okay, well, there's a goal. I guess you will, yes. But let's sleep so we don't die, right? Maybe? But recognizing truly that our brains and bodies need that rest. And especially if during our days we are caregiving, we need probably 10 hours of sleep a night. Now, if you can't get the full 8 hours directly, naps, yeah, naps are amazing. As often as you can get them. Staying hydrated is also a very basic self-care. Very basic. But how many of you go a whole day without drinking any water? Coffee doesn't count. Yeah, I say that to myself because I'll go a whole day and all I had was coffee. And then I'm irritable at the end of the day trying to figure out why. I'm like, oh, because you haven't put any water in your body, right? Very, very simple, but many of us don't do that. Same with exercise. Yes, I am that person that's going to tell you you need to get regular exercise. Right? I think it's 30 minutes a day? 10 minutes a day? Right? It doesn't mean you have to become a marathoner. You can walk. You can do the NAMI walk. Yeah? Yeah? Woohoo! I'm going to do it this year. Try to get some of my people to come with me. Right? So walking, if you have a pet, a dog that you can walk, a dog, right? You wouldn't walk a cat. But if you have a dog that you can walk, that can help just to get outside, get air, move your body, get oxygen to your brain, right? Any level of physical activity, because it's really easy to sit all day or to go from indoor to indoor, right? You're going from home to hospital to appointment to place to place to place. So making sure that you are getting regular exercise. And again, we're oxygenating our body, we're oxygenating our blood and our brain. It's also maybe our opportunity to be alone and connect with ourselves again, or connect with another friend, right? If you have a buddy that you go jogging with or someone that you take nature walks with, having that time to connect. And I do recommend kind of doing double duty with some of these things if you can, right? So connection with another human being is a good self-care tip, I should say. And if you can do that while you're exercising or while you're hydrating, that works. Or maybe hydrate while you exercise? Yeah. When you sleep, just sleep. Don't worry about anything else. Eating healthy food. How many of you have gone a whole day without eating anything? Not as many. Good. I like to see that. When I ask rooms full of social workers, every hand goes up, right? They've gone through a whole work day, didn't eat a thing. Remembering that our brains are regulated by food and water. When we're not regulated, our brain has a hard time focusing and pulling into connection. I didn't bring my brain model here, but we talk about our brain in kind of 3 parts, right? Our brain stem, our reptilian brain, our limbic system, the middle brain, and then our cortex, which is our thinking brain. And in order to get to the thinking brain, we have to first get to the limbic system, which is our connection with other people, being seen and heard and felt by other people. And in order to pull into that part of our brain, we have to be regulated. So our brain stem regulates all the things that we don't have to think about, right? You're sitting here breathing, I hope. You're breathing, you're blinking, you're swallowing, you're digesting your food. If you haven't eaten yet, your stomach's grumbling. It's going, where is the food, right? Your reproduction is working. All those things are working without you having to say, breathe, blink, swallow, breathe, blink, swallow, breathe, blink, swallow, because that would be exhausting and you never sleep. If you slept, you die, right? So your brain takes over some of those automated things for you. When we are not regulated, meaning we haven't eaten anything, we haven't been hydrated, maybe we haven't physically moved our body or slept, that throws off our regulation in our brain. And it makes it harder for us to pull up into the limbic brain, which is our connection to other people. Our caregiving happens in the limbic system. Our caregiving happens in the limbic brain. And we can't get into that part of our brain yet. We can't access that part of the brain if we're not doing these things. So in order to be good caregivers, to give quality care to those we love and those we serve, we have to regulate ourselves. And it's really, really basic and really simple, but it is really challenging. It's very easy for us to fall out of these regular habits, right? One of the things I used to do for myself when I was having a really hard time as a caregiver, I treated myself, anytime I had to go to a really hard appointment, my treat was a large chocolate shake and a large fry from McDonald's. Awesome. Made me feel good. Salt. Yeah. Chocolate. Right? And then as the appointments got more and more and more often, I was going more and more and more because I got to treat myself, right? I need that milkshake. And there was one day, I will admit fully, there was one day I went to the McDonald's 3 times. I know this is on camera and I hate to admit that publicly, but in one day, you guys, 3 times. Yeah, well, I wasn't then. That's the challenge, right? Literally, I gained 50 pounds doing that. Absolutely, right? My self-care was retail therapy to the tune of $23,000 of credit card debt because it's free money, right? I'm debt-free now and credit card-free now. Don't worry. This was in my 20s, right? I would treat myself with food, and I gained 50 pounds. And then I was trying to figure out why did my joints hurt. And I went to a doctor and he said, well, you know, if you lose some weight, your joints won't hurt. And I think I wrote him the riot act. How dare you shame me, right? He was right. What else did I do? The other thing, I paid for things that I really couldn't afford, right? So I was buying vacations for myself because I wanted to do that self-care. I was doing anything beyond these things. I wasn't eating healthy, clearly, right? From the other slide. Sleep was okay. I was getting plenty of sleep. I wasn't worried about hydration. I wasn't exercising. And that is when I found yoga, right? I decided to pull into a yoga practice for my own self-care, both for my caregiving overwhelm, but also for my own trauma. And this is why I do this work now, because I recognize that I thought I was doing really good self-care, and all of it caught up to me. Right? It was the food, it was the money, and it was the alcohol. And all of that eventually caught up to me with more negativity and more things that I needed to do more self-care from, right? Dealing with credit card debt, dealing with alcoholism, and dealing with, what was the last one? Gaining weight, right? Not eating well, caused more problems in my life than they solved. Yeah, so that's the other reason I do this conversation, because I did self-care wrong. And I want to help other people avoid that. The other thing is we have to be willing to ask for support and say yes when support is offered. That's another thing as caregivers are really challenged with. Sometimes that challenge is because we know we can do something better, right? If you're a spouse in here, you know your spouse always thinks they can do it better than you can, right? Especially if you're parenting. Yeah, I catch that. Like, I can totally put the kid down better than you can. Just get out of the way, let me do it, right? But truly allowing that other person to do that or do the caregiving, even if they don't do it the way you would want them to or the way that you would do it, right? So being able to pull that back a little bit. But also when someone offers us care, instead of saying, no, I got it, it's okay, we're good. Maybe being a little vulnerable and being willing to say, actually, yes, please, thank you. That would be wonderful. And can you come back next week too? Right? So no shame in asking for help. No shame in recognizing that you need that help. No shame in accepting that help. But that's a big thing for us as caregivers. A lot of us we don't want help. Or it's because we're so used to taking care of other people, we don't want to burden other people. But if someone is asking to help you, they truly want to. And if they're just asking because they want to make conversation, then you can call their bluff, right? Yes, actually, I do need you to come help cook me dinner. They'll be like, oh shoot, I was just saying that in passing. Now I got to cook dinner. And then making sure that we're connecting. Now, this is another really simple brain regulation. We have to connect to other human beings. And again, that's the beauty of NAMI. That's the beauty of this group. You're all here today. Connecting with other people reminds us who we are in relation to other people, reminds us that we're human and we're fallible. But it doesn't have to be to humans. And I say this because some days you're done with people, right? I know there are some days where I don't want to look at another human being. I just want to go home to my dog, right? Because dogs get it. There's no judgment. They're not going to ask a bunch of questions, right? So that connection doesn't have to be with another human. It can totally be with an animal, yeah? But we also have to be careful that we're not cutting out humans, other people, right? Again, that isolation can be very real. And that may not be a problem for any of you because, again, you're out here tonight. But for some of our fellow caregivers, they're not here tonight because that isolation is very real and they feel like they've pulled away from other people or disconnected from other people. Yeah. So when we can pull other people in, that's always a really great idea too. And it's beautiful to see so many new members. I noticed that, how many hands were raised. All right, so constantly pulling in new people. When we see someone struggling, when we know someone is caregiving or they're having a struggle, that we pull them in and say, hey, there's a community of us. We all get together and support each other. You're not alone in this, right? Because how often do we feel like we're the only one dealing with it, right? No one else will know exactly what we have to deal with our spouse, our sibling, our parent, our child. The challenge for a lot of us, too, as caregivers, is if we share what we're dealing with, we may be inadvertently exposing their story without their consent, right? So we have to be very careful in that way. But recognizing, though, that connection piece is so vital. And it's important to connect with people who have the similar experience as us, and also to connect with people who have nothing in common with us in relation to caring for someone with a mental illness. Sometimes it's good to have friends that don't even know about this world. Not ignorant friends that are going to say stupid things that are going to piss you off, right? But people truly who aren't burdened with caregiving, who maybe don't understand this world, maybe don't know anybody with a mental illness, right? Having that different shift of perspective can be helpful. Here are a few other forms of self-care, and I'm just going to move out of the way so your live folks can see that. Any of these are a good idea. And again, you'll get this PowerPoint or this presentation, so you'll be able to see these. One of the things that I have used as a little bit of self-care has been pulling in to very small practices that I can do in the car between appointments sometimes. Yeah? And I'll share a little bit more about that in the next slide, in the next few slides. So one of the other things about caregiving is that it's very important for us to remember the difference between caring for someone and carrying them. So it's a very kind of nuanced difference. But just the definitions alone have a different feel for us, right? When we're caring for someone, we're displaying kindness or concern for others. That feels good. When we're carrying someone, we're supporting the weight of that person. It's very important for us to remember that we can care for someone without carrying for them. And what I mean by that is, I can care for you, but I'm not going to take on all the crap that you want to push my way, right? Or all the other things that you're dealing with. I'm not going to take those on as my own. Does that make sense? Okay. Because it's very easy to pull into that. It kind of happens naturally. I know for me, right, I find myself dealing with depression the more my loved one deals with depression. It becomes really, really big for him, and then I pull into some of that. That's when I know I'm carrying him. And that's when I have to do my own self-care to remember that I'm not depressed. Right? I'm not anxious. I'm not bipolar. My loved one is. And in taking care of him, I carry some of that. Right? But it's not mine to carry. Unfortunately, it's not really even his to carry, but he's got to. Right? I can help him carry that load. I can care for him in a way that eases that load. But if I constantly take on his load, I'm no good for either of us. Right? It's that gas mask, the air mask, oxygen mask in the plane. I always say gas mask. I'm like, no, that's the opposite. We don't want that. Right? You guys have heard that analogy, right? That you need to put your oxygen mask on first before helping others put theirs on. And when I think I was 12 years old when I had my first flight, and I remember them, they do the whole flight safety thing, and they tell you, put yours on before the one you put on your kids. And I remember, when you're 12, you know everything. So I remember thinking to myself, and I said this out loud to my seatmates, I was like, that's really stupid. When I'm a mom, I'm going to be a better mom than that. I'm going to put the mask on my kids first because, duh, don't you want to save them first? Like, that's really selfish. And then someone wiser and older than me pulled me in and said, well, actually, do you know that if the oxygen actually goes out of the plane and you have to use the masks, if you take enough time to struggle and put that on the other person, you're going to pass out. And your kid is going to have to deal with that trauma by themselves because you're going to be useless. But if you put the mask on yourself, you'll be able to breathe the air, and then you'll be able to help as many people as you can. Made sense, right? My 12-year-old self didn't really understand that. But my 40-year-old self absolutely does. Right? And for me, my concept of putting the mask on yourself before you put it on the others is self-care. But it's also for me remembering the difference between caring for someone and carrying for them. And I hope that makes sense for you all. Okay. I should also put a little plug in. I have a podcast called the Steward Project podcast. I'll have it at the end of the slideshow. And I have a podcast specifically on the difference between caring and carrying. So if I'm not being very clear right now, the podcast will help. One of the other things that we need to do, and this is something that I talk often about self-care, but I also talk about what I call radical self-care. And I know the term radical is kind of being thrown around right now a little bit, but the word radical just means grasping at the root. Right? And for me, when I think about the stress and the overwhelm of being a caregiver, I want to pull down to the root cause of what is making me uncomfortable, what's making me frustrated, what's making me overwhelmed, and try to get rid of that. One of the things that I've learned, and many of you probably have as well, is that there's very little that we can control in our lives. The older I get, the more I know, the less I control. Right? And there's a book by Sharon Salzberg. It's a book called Loving Kindness. Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness. And in this book, Sharon shares a story, or a tale, I guess, of saying that the things in life that we can't control are like salt, right? And if you put a teaspoon of salt into a cup, it's going to change the consistency of that water, right? You're going to be drinking salty water. But if you take that same teaspoon of salt and you put it into an ocean, well, let's say a lake, because the ocean's already salty. Put it into a lake, it's not going to change the consistency of that body of water, right? You could even put a truckload of salt into that lake. It's still not going to change the constitution of that water. So what she says is that because we can't control everything, and the things that we can control are like salt in our lives, our job is not to control the amount of salt that comes in, but to expand our container to be able to accept any amount of salt. Right? And I love this quote. She says, our true work is to create a container so immense that any amount of salt, even a truckload, can come into it without affecting our capacity to receive it. This is radical self-care. Pulling into practices that help us expand our container so that when that truckload of salt comes, right? Every day it's like a little sprinkle, a little salt bay, right? A little sprinkle of salt. Sometimes it's a teaspoon or a cup at a time. And then we may have those situations where we're dealing with a truckload of salt coming in for a period of time, right? And if we're dealing with a cup, right? If our container is the size of a cup, we're going to get overwhelmed. So the goal is to expand our container so that we can accept anything that comes. And the way that we do that is through self-compassion. There's a book called Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. There's a book, you guys. There's research. This woman has a PhD. It's real. I share that because when I talk about self-compassion, sometimes I get eye rolls. Right? And sometimes people think, well, I'm dealing with something very real, and you're telling me to be self-compassionate? Like, yeah. But truly, I believe that self-compassion is the foundation of self-care. Because compassion is the basis and foundation of care. You can't care for someone if you don't have compassion for them. You just can't. Or you'll be a really crappy caregiver. You have to have some level of compassion for those that you're caring for, those that you're serving. The challenge is, and again, I mentioned this in a few slides ago, we have to be willing to give ourselves the same amount of compassion that we give to other people. Self-compassion allows us to take a different perspective on the situation that we're dealing with. Especially, it's really, really hard when we're super, super close to the challenge, right? When we're really dealing with something and it's in our bedroom, it's in our house, it's in our family, right? We lose perspective. We become very myopic, yeah? And we need to pull away a little bit sometimes to really see around the situation, to see a few more angles, to see a few more sides of it. And that can be hard when we're in crisis all the time. We might need a break to be able to pull away. But when we're being compassionate with ourselves, and compassion, the word compassion is calm and passion, right? Those are the two roots of it. And the word passion actually means suffering. Right? Think of the movie Passion of the Christ. I don't know if anyone saw that, but I think it was like 3 hours of blood and gore and crucifixion. Really suffering. Right? And calm means with. So compassion means to suffer with. And usually it's to suffer with another, right? When we're compassionate towards someone else, we're going alongside them as they're dealing with what they're dealing with. Compassion for ourselves means that we are sitting with our own suffering. Being kind to ourselves, right? Responding with kindness and concern when we're noticing that chronic fatigue or the compassion fatigue creep in. Self-compassion allows us to be less judgmental with ourselves. Again, as a caregiver, it can be easy to fall into feeling like we're not doing enough or we're not doing it right. Sometimes we put that on ourselves, but sometimes the one that we're caring for may put that on us, right? And I jokingly say we have this part of our brain I call the itty-bitty shitty committee. Comes online as soon as we do something, right? And it's just judgment. It's just that voice in our head like, why'd you do that? You know you said that out loud. You know your shoes don't match your outfit. Right? And that happens a lot for us. So when we're caring for someone else and something goes wrong, or there's a blow up or there's an outburst, we may blame ourselves. It's very easy to fall into that judgment. Oh, I should have known better. I knew he needed his meds at this certain time and we were out of town and I didn't pack them or whatever, right? We pull into that judgment. And that makes it really hard, though, to do self-care when we're constantly beating ourselves up. Remembering that we're human and we're allowed to make mistakes.
What's the name of the book?
Self-compassion. Yeah. Oh, I'll take it back. And then self-compassion also helps us keep overwhelm at bay. And this is something that Kristen says, or Dr. Neff says in her book, that self-compassion allows us to feel other people's pain without becoming overwhelmed by it. And again, that's that difference between caring for someone versus carrying. Right? I can care for you. I can be kind to your suffering. I can turn toward you and help you and support you. But if I'm not being compassionate with myself and I'm not paying attention, I can take all that on. And then I'm holding it myself. And then my only identity is as your caregiver. Right? I lose myself in that. We have to be very careful not to do that. Some of the ways that we can pull into self-compassion are some practices that I think these are radical self-care practices. They are available to anybody of any ability, right? Yoga is not just for thin, wealthy white women. You can do yoga in any capacity. I've done yoga with amputees. I've done yoga with kids with autism. I've done yoga for 12-step recovery. I've done yoga for survivors of sexual assault and trauma. Right? Yoga is available to anybody. Because what yoga does is it's a combination. You're combining your breath and your physical movement together. Right? And that helps calm our nervous system. When we slow our breath and we compare our breath with our movements, whether we're walking, right? That's a power. Or we're doing yoga or something else, running, badminton, tennis, basketball. We're regulating our brains. We're rewiring our brains a little bit. We're giving ourselves that ability to pull out of a stress response. Right? We're shifting our nervous system. Mindfulness is simply a way of being or of showing up in the world. Mindfulness is just a way of paying attention in a particular way, which means we're paying attention on purpose. We're paying attention in the present moment. Right? We're not ruminating on the past. We're not projecting into the future. We're focusing on what's going on right now. And we're doing it without judgment. Mindfulness is a real challenge when we're caregiving for someone with a mental illness. Because sometimes, and I'm speaking from my own experience, sometimes I feel like I'm just being pulled around, right? Like it's one thing to another thing to another thing, and as soon as I think I have one thing figured out, right, it's like whack-a-mole. I got this medication figured out. Oh yeah, well what about this symptom, right? You got this routine figured out. Okay, well, surprise, new visitor, right? I constantly feel that way unless I'm focusing on my mindfulness. Because for me, sometimes it's hard when I'm dealing with something in the moment to not pull into the past and be like, ugh, we've been here before. Why are we doing this again? We already know that this is what happens when we do this. Right? And I get very frustrated and very short and very irritable. And I'm not the nicest caregiver. And sometimes I project into the future. I worry about things that haven't happened yet. Right? Something's happening in the moment right now, and I'm already like, oh, this is going to be horrible. When we go there, this is what's going to happen. Oh, I better get the doctor's number ready. Right? I'm already projecting that worry. But again, that makes me not a very good caregiver. I'm not in that moment. I'm not with the person that I'm taking care of. So mindfulness is actually, it's not necessarily a specific, you don't have to do anything with it. It's more of a way of being, of how are you going about your day? How are you going about your caregiving? Are you being aware? Mindfulness also helps us know what we need for self-care, right? Are you aware of the fact that you haven't had anything to drink yet today? Right? Are you being mindful of the fact that you're exhausted, you haven't slept? So maybe it might be a good idea to be quiet in that meeting with the doctor so we don't say anything we don't mean. Right? Now, meditation is a specific practice, right? I always say meditation is a very specific practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is just a way of being, of going around the world, or about the world, right? So meditation is a specific practice. It can be guided or silent. You can do it sitting still or moving physically. But I really highly, strongly recommend, and I am going to be that person again, saying that 5 to 10 minutes of meditation every day will change your life. Well, let me amend that. There's an asterisk on that will change your life. Yeah. It won't make everything better. It won't magically make your loved one not mentally ill. It won't magically make your life rainbows and unicorns. There's a little bit of that. But what meditation and mindfulness and yoga do is it helps us expand that container. It gives us a little bit more space, both physically in our body, like you can actually feel the physical space. It also opens up time a little bit more. When we all have 10 minutes that we can take on our own. Whether, I know we don't feel like it sometimes, right? I sometimes feel like every second is given to someone else, or every second of my day from the moment I wake up till when I go to sleep is scheduled. And I don't have 5 minutes. I barely even go to the bathroom during one day sometimes, right? But I know that we have 5 or 10 minutes. And this is one of those practices I've been doing in the car. For me, especially if I'm doing doctor's appointments or if I'm at the hospital, if I'm dealing with some kind of crisis, for me, it's sitting in my car, radio off, phone under the seat, wherever I can put it, right? And just taking a moment to breathe, to focus on how my body feels in that moment, right? Is my chest tight? Is my belly flipping? Are my extremities numb, right? We lose feeling in our fingers and our toes when we're really stressed out. You might not even notice. Paying attention to how I feel in that moment, and then I can do whatever it is I need to take care of myself in the moment so that I can be fully present for the person that I care for. I can sit in a meeting and I can understand what the doctors are telling me so that I can take that information home and take better care of him, right? So for me, these three things are the only way I've survived the last 5 years of intense caregiving. And when we do those things, right, when we're taking care of the basic self-care things, eating enough food, staying hydrated, we're getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, getting enough support and enough connection with other humans or animals, we pull into compassion satisfaction, where we're able to give ourselves the credit for everything that we do for our loved one. We're not beating ourselves up when we make mistakes. There's always an opportunity to repair or to begin again, or to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad." Recognizing that when we are being self-compassionate, we are more likely to pull into concrete self-care practices. And self-care can't just be something we do when we don't feel good or when things are getting bad. It's something we have to do consistently. It's a daily shift in our habits. Right? Making sure we're eating breakfast. Making sure we're, like I said, we're hydrating, we're eating real food, we're getting sleep. Those things have to be consistent for us to have this compassion satisfaction, to be able to take care of our loved ones without burning out. Being able to commit to respite or time off. Again, when someone offers you that respite, take it. If you need it, ask for it. And recognizing that you're not a failure for taking time away from your loved one or for asking for that help, having someone else come in to help with that. Making sure we're setting and keeping very clear boundaries on our time, our energy, and our money. Caregiving can be a time suck, it can be a money suck, it can be an energy suck. You all know this. Making sure we're regularly connecting with people that we love and colleagues and communities. Participating in communities like this, right? That keeps us in a place of compassion satisfaction. We can care for this other person without carrying a lot of it. And then not only can we care for that other person, but we can care for ourselves in a way that edifies us. Because ultimately, here's the thing. What I hear from a lot of people is, I just need to survive this. I just need to survive this. And I don't want us just to survive this. I want us to thrive as caregivers. I want us to thrive in our lives. I want us to enjoy our lives, even as we take care of others, even as we face challenges, even as we have the salt being pushed in. Right? And the only way to do that is to pull into self-care practices, to make those daily habits, and to pull into community. One of my favorite quotes from Lila Watson, who is an Aboriginal feminist and social justice warrior, is, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound together with mine, then let us work together." That's how I feel about caregiving. That's how I feel about sharing this information with organizations like NAMI. And this is how I feel about the work that we do with those that we love. So I don't know if we have time for questions. I want to make sure I honor your time. Okay. So, and this is my contact information. Please feel free to email if you'd like, and then my link to the podcast. And I will share all this with Bev and Kathy as well, that they can email out to members. Are there any questions, comments, any stories you'd like to share? I'll accept criticisms as well. Yeah. Yes. So the 2 books that I shared, one is The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. and it's NEFF. Make sure you're live, people can see it. And then the other one was Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness by Sharon Salzberg. And you guys are welcome to, obviously I've read a few of these, I have a few tabs, so if you'd like to come and check them out before we head out, absolutely. Any other questions?
How do you organize your own self-care throughout the day?
You do have to schedule it. I recommend scheduling it, because if it's not on the calendar and it's not in black ink, and it's in ink, not pencil, right? Because I can erase the pencil stuff if it comes off easy. It's truly scheduling it. And once it becomes a habit, something that you do regularly, that makes it easier. Like for me, it's I get out of bed, I brush my teeth, I go meditate. Like I just sit on my bedroom floor or sit out on the patio. Like that's a everyday, without fail, even if I'm traveling. That's taken a while for me to do though. I'm very good at procrastinating. So I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that diet tomorrow. I'll do that, right? So yeah, I would suggest putting it on the calendar, and it's not negotiable. In the same way that the things for your loved one are not negotiable, or meetings for other people or for work aren't negotiable, right? It's worth that investment. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, we have one in the back. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate your time.